Okay, it's 12 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next seminar in the FBA series, where we're exploring fellows' careers to date and some of the key FBA projects. For those who don't know me, my name is Mark Batista. I look after the marketing and membership here at the FBA. We hope that you're enjoying the series so far. If you've missed any of the talks, you can find them under the Discover and Learn tab on the FBA website. And if you're not already a member, then please do join us. You can find out more about becoming a member over on fba.org.uk. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Craig Macadam. Craig has been studying freshwater invertebrates for 35 years, which is an incredible long time. His particular specialism is mayflies and stoneflies and habitats that they inhabit. Following 11 years in the water industry, Craig now heads up conservation team at Buglife, the Invertebrate Conservation Trust, where he was responsible for the development of their freshwater strategy. He's a founder member of the Riverfly Partnership and national coordinator of the Mayfly and Stonefly recording schemes. Craig also co-chairs the IUCN Mayfly, Stonefly and Caddisfly specialist group, which undertakes red list assessments and develops conservation action for threatened species. So without further ado, whenever you're ready, Craig, if you want to take it away.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to do this talk, and it's great to see all these people here today. I've probably got too many slides in here, so I'm going to rattle through them fairly fast and hopefully stick to the hour that I've got. But first, just to start off with, I need to explain the title because I realised that I used a Scottish word in there, and somebody already pulled me up on it. But basically, to guddle is to catch fish predominantly with your hands in a stream, or to get messy and basically it sums up quite well what I do when I go out to a stream. I usually get my hands in there and just find out what's going on. And the picture on this slide is actually T.T. McCann. It's from the FBA archives, and it's T.T. McCann on the banks of Ennerdale, Guddling, I would say. So my story starts up in the northeast of Scotland, up just north of Arbroath. Well, just south of Montrose, between the two. I was born at Rossie, and I was named after the sign at the end of the road, which pointed to another village called Craig. Apparently, if I'd lived in Craig, I would have been called Ross. I was lucky enough to live on the banks of a river as a kid, all through my childhood, on the banks of the Lunnon Water. The Lunnon Water was a fairly small water course, running about 13 miles from Roscoby Loch near Forfar down to the sea at Lunnon Bay. And it was here I just used to explore this. I used to fish it as a kid. I was a member of the Angling Club, and this bridge was just along, this old road bridge was just along from the house that I stayed in. And I kept a diary as a kid of my fishing and my explorations, and so it's actually, I can pinpoint the exact day that I got interested in invertebrates. The 30th of July 1986 was a wet day. Most of the days were wet, actually, think about it, but it was a wet day. I was out fishing and I kind of got bored, so I was standing sheltering from the rain underneath that road bridge, and there was a big pallet in the middle of the river, and my diary sort of explains that I moved the pallet under the old road bridge, and I was amazed to find thousands, probably an exaggeration, hundreds of shrimps on it, and I put it back into the middle of the pool, and these shrimps kind of captivated my imagination. I just couldn't believe there's so many for starters, but I kept going back there and pulling that pallet out and then having a look at the shrimps and taking them home and putting them in various pots around the house and in the garage and in the greenhouse and all sorts of places. The ones in the greenhouse died fairly quickly. But I started to observe them, started to look at them, and I noticed that some were behaving differently. I didn't know anything about them at the time. I was 14-year-old. I was at high school. I didn't actually do biology at high school, but I noticed that some of them had this like orange dot in them, and didn't know what it was, but the ones that were the orange dot were swimming sort of like differently to the other ones. And I later found out that this is a parasitic worm, Pomphorhynchus, which changes the behaviour of the shrimps, makes them swim further up in the water column, makes them more visible to their final host, the fish, and in this case, trout. So this really got me interested in, in invertebrates. I started looking at what else was in the river, started turning over more stones and getting a little aquarium net and having a look and seeing what I was finding. Every year I used to get a book token from a Christmas from my gran, and in the January I would go out and I would buy a book. And in 1986, it just so happens that the book on the left here was published. And in January I went to my local bookshop, and there it was on the shelf, and I bought it with my book token. And I think this is probably what really got me interested. I suddenly could actually put names to things and work out what I was seeing, and not just the invertebrates, but everything else around about the river. Really opened my eyes. I went to the local library and had a look what other books there were, and came across Macadam's Blue Book, the Guide to Freshwater Invertebrate Animals. And I suppose this was the first book I'd found that was all about invertebrates. And I think I probably borrowed this book constantly from the library for about 3 years. It really sort of like I read them cover to cover, as an ID book. It didn't matter. I just read them cover to cover. 3 years later, in 1989, there was a pollution incident on the river, and in my diary, I noted that a diesel tank had been opened and it had seeped into the river, and the river was dead from Kneal, about halfway up the river downstream. I went out there with my little net and had a look at what was happening, and I actually went as far as I could go on my bike up the river and had a look, and it was quite interesting. Looking back, that was an investigation of a pollution incident. I was finding healthy populations up above the up above the quarry, and then below it, progressively worse. 160 dead shrimps in a small sample that I was taking, and things like that. And this really actually concerned me. It got me thinking about the river and what was going on in it. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know how this had happened, and what was happening to the river, how it would recover. And I, in one of the press reports at the time, there was this thing, the Tay River Purification Board had made some comment about the pollution, and I thought, well, they must know about it. So I went and I found their office in Arbroath, local town, and doorstepped them, basically, tapped the door, and asked to speak to somebody about the loon and water. And this guy here, Willie Gillis, was the area officer, I think, at the time, and he invited me in and sat me down and talked to me as a 16, 17-year-old, and talked me through what had happened, what they were doing. And I was a regular visitor then to the office, the Purification Board office. Willie Gillis told me all about pollution and what impacts it had on rivers. He introduced me to the book on the left there, Hines' classic book on biology of polluted waters. And again, I was able to borrow that from the library. And again, read it cover to cover several times, and still dip into it now. I found in the library, I found another book next to the one on the right, and again that told me about what was happening in the river when there was pollution incidents. Willie also gave me some of the data that they had from the loon and water, from their monitoring, and that was great to see the names that I'd been sort of like reading, to see that to understand that those species were in the river, and and what was happening in the river. And in those days, Willie introduced me to biotic indices, the Trent Biotic Index and Chandler Biotic Score, and then latterly the BMWP score. And I was really getting into this by this time. And it was about the time when you had to make your choices at school for what you were going to do after secondary school. And I probably got a bit of a wrong steer from the careers guidance. I hadn't done biology at school, so I couldn't go and do a biology degree. But because I was interested in rivers and pollution and things and water treatment, they suggested I should go and do civil engineering. So I followed off to what was Dundee Institute of Technology, and now Abertay University, and I enrolled on a degree doing civil engineering. And that involved a lot of this sort of stuff, topographical surveying, lots of drawing of plans and the like. I quite enjoyed doing that. I was quite good at doing the plans. But it also included, they had a great fluids hydraulics lab as well, and that was fascinating. Actually learning more about river processes through experiment. Unfortunately, at the end of the second year, they dropped the hydraulics element. There was no hydraulics speciality in the third year, and it was all about roads engineering, traffic engineering. That just wasn't where I was wanting to go. So I cut my losses and left with an HND in civil engineering, then went and looked for a job. I could only find jobs in civil engineering, obviously, and I eventually found a job in Central Regional Council down in Stirling as an engineering technician in their new works department, which was basically an engineering department that was looking at the design and construction of new infrastructure for water and wastewater treatment. So I did a lot more surveying, a lot of topographical surveying. I did a lot of design. I was responsible for, I was an assistant engineer on Alloa wastewater treatment works. I was responsible for decommissioning of sewage treatment works and the drain, moving the new sewer, taking stuff out of the catchment to different treatment works. Lots of engineering stuff, basically, and still really wasn't what I was after. Really wasn't what I wanted to do. In 1996, the water industry in Scotland was reorganised, and the regional councils no longer existed, and there was 3 new water authorities formed. And as part of that formation, I was fortunate enough to skip out of civil engineering and into environmental policy. And this was getting a bit closer to what I wanted to do. Environmental policy, I was responsible. The two of us in the drinking water side were responsible for everything from when the rain hit the land to when it came out of your tap. So we did things like reservoirs, surface water regulations, reservoir issues with reservoirs like algal blooms and turbidity. We did lead in water, fluoridation, whole load of policy issues. But we also had in our team, we were also responsible for fisheries on the reservoirs. And Drew Jameson, who was my line manager, got me involved in fisheries. And between us, we managed the fisheries that Scottish Water had. He also at that time introduced me to the Institute of Fisheries Management. And for a short spell, I was the secretary of the Scottish branch, and during that time, we produced some guidance on caring for wild trout. So what the needs of wild trout were in the habitats, particularly around about where we were working. For the fisheries, there were 15 fisheries, some really classic places like Loch Turret, Carn Valley, Gladhouse, classic fishing venues, a range of different types of fishery from purely wild trout, no stocking at all, to effectively put and take rainbow trout fisheries at Rosebery and places like that. I did a lot of analysis of catch returns, ordering all the fish up, and just generally everything to do with the fisheries management. It was great. It was actually great time to do that. It was great to go out to all these places as well. And I was also able to dabble again, looking at what fish food was there, what invertebrates were in these reservoirs, and did a few surveys around them. Around about that time, at Castle Hill, I was introduced to Peter Maitland and Colin Bean. Not Castle, Cairn Valley, sorry. A few years earlier, Peter Maitland had been involved in a conservation translocation of Powan, pictured here, from its one site in Scotland to several of these reservoirs. And Cairn Valley was one of the reservoirs that it was introduced into. And we'd always, we used to get catch returns with Powan on them every so often, and we thought they were doing fairly well. But at that time, Colin was working at the University of Stirling and had various students out looking for Powan, and yes, it was breeding well in the reservoir. Also, at that time was when I first really got involved in the Scottish Freshwater group. Went along to one of their meetings. Thought this is great. All these people that actually like freshwaters. I'm not alone, sort of thing. And I've been going along there, for 20 odd years. And it is absolutely fantastic to have a like-minded people and to hear about what keep up to date with what's going on in freshwaters in Scotland and wide and further afield. To meet up with people. I can't wait until we can get back into real life meetings of the group as well. In 2003, Scottish Water were looking to downsize their staff, so they were offering redundancy, voluntary redundancy, and I took it and left the water industry, and I set myself up as a consultant and actually did work for Scottish Water. They'd been doing their lab had taken on a contract that they had, I think they thought it was microbiology, but it was actually macrobiology, and they were looking at looking at the impact of airports in Scotland on watercourses, and I was getting a day a week towards the end of my time at Scottish Water to actually do that work. And when I left, I was able to continue that work for them, which was great. And so, going up to Aberdeen Airport and sampling around about it in the Don and various other small streams, just to see what the impact was, doing the same in Edinburgh as well. Consultancy, though, always trying to find the next project to work on was tough, and I eventually thought I need to get a real job, and I had a short spell as a biodiversity officer with Falkirk Council before Buglife came along and offered me a role as their conservation officer in Scotland, and I've been there ever since. Just quick thing on Buglife. Buglife's the only organisation in Europe concerned with the conservation of all invertebrates. Our aim is to halt invertebrate extinctions and achieve sustainable populations of invertebrates in the UK and abroad. We do that through a variety of activities. We go out there and we just inspire people. We show them invertebrates and show them how amazing their life stories are and where they live and so on. We undertake practical conservation work where we like this bog restoration project here, where we actually improve habitats for invertebrates. We try and shape policy, so we do some advocacy work, which is looking at influence policy decisions, and we've developed various strategies and positions. These are our pollinator strategy and our freshwater strategy, and we go out there and raise awareness and do talks and walks and presentations and the like. And going back to freshwaters, though, Peter Maitland crops up quite a lot in this presentation, and I seem to have been following him around, repeating things that he's done in the past. But in 1999, he published this paper. I think he may have presented it at the Freshwater group. And in this, he looked at invertebrate fauna of Scotland and what was still to be looked at, what was still to be explored. And he picked out 3 different areas: water underground, water on peat, and temporary waters. And I'm just going to go through these quickly to show you some of the stuff that I've been involved with. Water underground, I don't know if we'll get the sound on this, but exploring the Hypereus is another, again, it's that hidden life underneath the river, the hidden flow. And Peter had, when he was doing his PhD, had discovered a microcrustacean, and what's now Antrobathynella stammeri, on a small tributary of the Endemic up in near Glasgow. And he discovered this, and that sounded like something that we could go and have a look and try and find again. And Jennifer Dodd and I have been many times now looking for this and doing various different types of sampling to try and find this. Unfortunately, we've not found it. We've had Peter out as well on a Scottish Freshwater group field trip. We went out and had a look for it as well, but sadly we've not found it. But we've not given up hope. The river does seem to have had a lot of sedimentation and compaction since when Peter found it. So perhaps it's not there anymore, but we'll keep looking. Water on peat, I've been really fortunate in that Buglife will be doing some really big peat restoration projects, and this is up at near Cumbernauld and Fannyside Muir, where we're blocking drains. We've been blocking drains and re-wetting the bog. There's big drains in here, big things that will just sucking all the water off the bog, and we've put in ditch dams and various other structures and managed to hold up the water. And it was amazing, seeing this. Once the dam was finished and the water started filling up, immediately there were dragonflies coming, black darter dragonflies coming, laying eggs on this. It really was a case of, we wet it and everything else came and found it. And the end result of the project was this, fantastic wet bog. And over the period since we did this, we've been looking at the invertebrates that have been starting to recolonize this, and we've got some great water beetle records now from here, and also the dragonflies have spread across the whole bog. Temporary waters is probably the area that I've done most in of those unexplored habitats. This unassuming fence post down on the Solway coast, the cattle rub themselves against it and poach around the bottom of it, but it's actually one of the best sites in Scotland best locations in Scotland for the tadpole shrimp, Triops cancriformis. When it wets up, this is absolutely seething with the tadpole shrimps. Triops is only found in 2 areas in the UK. It's only found in the Solway coast and in the New Forest. And we've got a project we're developing at Buglife to try and safeguard the population on the Solway by introducing it again to one of the sites it's been lost to. There's a constant issue with sea level rise on the Solway coast that some of the ponds that it lives in have now disappeared. Another species I've worked on quite a lot is pond mud snail, Omphiscola glabra. There's 14 locations in Scotland, historical locations in Scotland. We ran a project at Buglife looking at the conservation of this species, and that involved whole range of activities, looking at the specimens in the museum to find out hunt down where these populations were, going out and trying to find out if the species was still present in those locations. Where we did find it, we found 5 sites where it was present, and we collected up specimens, and we worked with schools to actually we gave each school 5 snails, and they cared for them. They fed them with lettuce and the eggs, the laid eggs, and then they cared for those small snails. And then during that time, we were creating habitat for these snails, and we've now got 14 populations again, 14 ponds with snails in Scotland. So it was a really good, nice circular project that, that finished off with a good result for the species. In running water, temporary streams, worked a lot with Rachel Stubbington on temporary streams and looking at the specialist invertebrates of temporary streams like these ones here. There is a knot of real specialists that are only found or predominantly found in temporary streams, and here's just some examples here. The Syphilinurus armatus is probably the rarest mayfly we've got in the UK. It's only found in 3 sites, all in temporary streams. Yeah, and we've published various bits and bobs on temporary streams. On the left there, the Valuing Nature report on the natural capital of temporary rivers. That was quite interesting to do. I'm looking at it in a different way. And then just recently, the last issue of FBA News, we had a look at the specialist insects, and we asked the question whether England was a global hotspot of temporary stream specialist species. It certainly seems to be quite a aggregation of them in England, and really we were challenging somebody to prove us wrong, tell us where was better. Temperate streams also took me up into the hills, and headwater streams. I'm really quite interested in headwater streams and just what's going on in them, and particularly in terms of climate change. The particular species I've been working on for something like 12, 15 years is Amyletus inopinatus, the upland summer mayfly. As its name suggests, it's only really found in the uplands. In Scotland, it can get down a bit lower because temperatures are cooler. It likes streams like this, little headwaters up in the hills, and they can be pretty harsh places in the winter. Completely snowbound or icebound. Been studying this species up in the Cairngorms at Glen Shee, in the southern Cairngorms. And Glen Shee is a ski centre, one of 5 ski centres in Scotland. And one of the reasons for sampling there is that I'm a bit of a lazy entomologist, and I can drive up to 660 metres in the car, park at the side of a stream, and sample there. There's also a cafe that does amazing cakes just next to it as well. But it's a useful place because you're at a watershed. To the north, you've got a north flowing stream down to the Dee, and then to the south, it's going to the Tay. So we've got various places that we can look at what's happening differently. There's a fair bit of snow cover up there, as you expect at a ski centre, although it is lessening all the time, and that proves that poses an interesting thing, an interesting problem for this species and other species that live here, in that at times the channel is completely snowbound, and at other times it's completely dry because it's dried out in the summer. So there's a very small window that this species has for actually developing. And actually the snow helps it achieve that by insulating the water and keeping the water temperature up so that it can have a more continual growth, through the winter rather than slowing down. There are other challenges. It's the highest car park in Scotland, and there's hundreds of cars there, with all the issues of fuel leakages and road salt and things like that. So it's harsh for many reasons. And we've worked with Willie Yeomans at the Clyde River Foundation and Louis Kitchen, who was there as well. He was fortunate to get a Gilson Award from the FBA, and we were able to spend a year working with Louis up here, looking at Amyletus. And we had loggers out looking at what was happening with water temperature. We can see there the effect of the snow cover on the water temperature. It just flattens it out and keeps it nice and steady. Why we're doing this is to look at what what would happen under different climate change when water temperatures increased. And we found, there was already evidence that Amyloethus was retreating up these hills, and we were able to look at previous records of Amyloethus and then go back and see what was happening with them. And yes, it had retreated up the hills. Just around about the same time, there was a European study that did some climate modelling and showed that under climate projections, that Amyloethus would be lost from many of the areas where it is currently found, much of Central Europe and much of the UK. So no longer present in Wales or in England by 2080, and that the strongholds would be Scandinavia, the Alps, and the Cairngorms. And using the information that's in that paper and looking at some of the stuff that we've been doing with the Gilson Award, the Gilson project, and we were able to look at our study area and look at what the impact would be, what climate space would be available for this species. And we are probably at the moment round about the 450 meters. That's where it is at the moment. It's pushing towards the 600, and we'll be going back hopefully in the next year or so to have a look and see where it is now. But yeah, and then you can project that out over the whole of Scotland. You can see just how little habitat could be available for this species once it starts having to move further upstream. Moving on from up the hills to off the coast, we had the opportunity at Buglife to go over to the Isle of May with a team to have a look at all invertebrates on the island. Isle of May is a national nature reserve off the coast of Fife and Lothian in the River Forth. It turns out that Peter Maitland had already been here, so I repeated Peter's surveys from the 1950s on the ponds on the island, and it was really quite interesting because the results we got were quite different. There was some overlap, but the fauna had changed quite markedly. Most of these are temporary ponds that are either horribly polluted by the bird life on the island, or they dry up during the year. But it was really interesting to go out there and actually sample them again, look and see what was similar to when Peter did it in the 50s, and then what we were getting now. And like I say, there was some overlap, but not an awful lot. Another thing that I've kind of followed Peter around doing is looking at medicinal leech. The medicinal leech there's only 2 sites in Scotland, 2 extant sites. There's around about 14 historical sites. Back in the mid-1990s, Peter did a project looking at all those sites, and again, medicinal leech is something, it's one of those species where it kind of catches your imagination. I was looking for a project to do, personal project to do, and I was thinking, well, medicinal leech would be something interesting. I'm also quite interested in history and etymology, not just entomology. And it occurred to me that because of the cultural significance of medicinal leech, it might actually turn up in place names. And there was a chap at the RSPB that had been tracking golden eagle ranges, historical ranges of golden eagles by place names. And I thought, I wonder if you could do it with leeches. And it turns out you can. There is a Gaelic word for leech, which is dela. And if you look in the Gazetteer, OS Gazetteer, for the first edition maps, there are something like 20 loch of the leeches around Scotland, and some of them have information talking about those lochs holding the superior kind of leech, which is almost certainly medicinal leech. So I'm busy going around sampling these to see if any of them still have medicinal leeches in. Unfortunately, not found any yet. There's been quite a few with horse leeches in, but I still hold out hope that we might find another population that's been overlooked. A lot of my work focuses on the Cairngorms. A lot of my study focuses on the Cairngorms, and it's a place that's got amazing rivers. You know, every type of river you could think of, but generally very clean, fast flowing rivers off of you know, with good riparian habitat and the like. And I've been going around trying to sample as many of those as possible to try and try and look at the mayfly and stonefly populations and to see how they compare. So this is my list today, although I think I've now got the Calder and the Troom that I can add to this graph, and you can see there's quite a range in the number of species of stonefly and mayfly in those rivers. The River Mick, which flows into the River Dee at Ballater, was it was really quite surprising just how many stonefly species. Probably one of the better ones well, it is the best one in the Cairngorms. You know, it's more species than we got in the main stem of the Spey. There's a few that I've not done. There's a few more rivers to do, but it's really interesting to build that picture of what's going on across a whole area like that. And it also took me into stoneflies in a big way. Fortunate in the UK of having some endemic stoneflies, you know, things that don't occur anywhere else. We've got 2 species and 2 subspecies, and these are things that, you know, nobody else is working on. There's nobody, you can't draw on information from Europe or elsewhere in the world, because these are only found in the UK, and in some cases only in Scotland. So, you know, been trying to gather information on these as well, and various projects underway on them at the moment. But I kind of, you know, one of these. My interest in stoneflies has really made me realise I've got an entomological hero, and that's Kenneth Morton. Kenneth Morton was a Scottish banker who was, in his spare time, was a naturalist and particularly interested in small orders, you know, caddisflies, mayflies, stoneflies, and the like. He lived on the banks of the Clyde. He became an expert on those groups and corresponded with people all around the world. He described something like 23 species of stonefly, and his collections in the National Museums of Scotland in Edinburgh. And I've been really lucky to be able to go in there and actually work on Morton's collection, rearrange it, recurate it. And it's been really interesting looking at some of the species and some of the places where he went. He went to the highest loch in Scotland and collected Capnearatra and described it from there. He went to he found the only site in Scotland for Ylodes simulans, Caddisfly, which is on the River Forth. The River Forth is a kind of forgotten river, I think, in central Scotland. You know, all the focus goes on the big salmon rivers like the Teith and the Allen and Endrick and places like that, and kind of forget about the Forth, which is this really lowland river that meanders along. But it's a beautiful river. It's got some amazing habitats in it, and I just love exploring it. Morton also described found Adicella filicornis in Scotland. He found that in Cleghorn Glen, and this was one that took quite a bit of refinding. We went off and had a look at this, and the Cleghorn Glens are a large ancient woodland, and we finally found the habitat, which was this little trickle. It was a muddy puddle basically, and in there was this Caddisfly. It was a really wet day though, as a lot of our collecting trips are. But the species that I've probably worked on most is Brachyptra putata, northern February red. Morton collected this on the Clyde. It was first described from the Clyde at New Lanark, and it's actually perhaps one of the only stoneflies that has its type locality on a banknote. So it was probably collected somewhere down to the left-hand side of there, next to the river. it's an early season species. It's present in streams from end of October through to March. It hatches out between the end of February and into March. The females, and this is a female here, which has 4 bands on its wings. And the wingtip is darkened, and they're fully winged. The males are short winged and reddish colour. They're really easy to survey for, because you can walk along the river and the males all gather on the fence posts, and the females will come along there as well. And so we've been able to do quite a lot of survey work just by looking for the adults. We've also been able to look at its things like its feeding, and getting this was actually sent in from a volunteer who found the males feeding on the algae and lichens on the fence post. And we ran a citizen science survey, just getting people out looking at fence posts. And this has been really good. We've run this for 3 years. Last year we allocated volunteers that had done it before. We allocated them a 1 kilometre square, and they went off to the river and went and looked at all the fence posts along that stretch to have a look for it. And it's worked really well. We've got lots of new records and confirmed the distribution of this species. The other thing I'm really interested in is stonefly drumming. And this, I don't know if the sound's working on this or not, but stoneflies have this unique way of finding a mate, where they drum their abdomen against the substrate, or in this case a twig, and then the vibration is felt by the female, and she'll reply. And whole range of species do this, and I've been really interested in this and actually started to record some of these and actually analyze them. So we've been working on a whole bunch of species. Worked with Jennifer Dodd and students at the Napier University on Headwaters Morton. This year coming, we're going to do Brachyptra pitata, working with Hugh Feely over in Ireland on Perla bipunctata as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting aspect of their ecology, and it's led on to a unusual collaboration, I suppose. So Scott Matheson, a good friend of mine, is into music, nature-inspired music, and he prepared a piece based on the drumming of stoneflies, and you'll find out all about that in the next FBA news, and there'll be a link in there for you to a QR code to actually access the tune. As Mark mentioned at the start, I'm national coordinator for mayflies and stonefly recording schemes, and just while I'm finishing off this talk, just to give you a little bit on the recording schemes. They're basically set up to act as champions for these groups, and we do various activities, whether it's training or providing producing identification guides, and just basically encouraging recording. These are slightly out of date, these maps, but you can see the sort of coverage of records. Caddisflies have the most records. Ian Wallace has been at it for a long time. I took over the Mayfly recording scheme in 2000, and we've got a fairly complete map. And then I took over originally the stoneflies were done by David Price, and then when he moved to St Helena, I took it over, and we've been trying to fill in the gaps on that map now. We, as Mark said, I found a member of the Riverfly Partnership, and that was kind of about encouraging people to look a bit closer. I suppose it kind of appeals to me because it's kind of what I did when I was a kid, and going back to those diaries and looking and saying, this is the sort of thing that I would want to do, and this is what I did as a kid, looking at what was happening in the river. And it's great to be able to teach people all about what's going on in the river, and for them to feel that they've got a voice about their river. And we also encourage recording, and this Ian Wallace and Jennifer Dodd, and when we went for a wander up a stream in near Glasgow, and it was just sharing that knowledge about invertebrates and telling them about what makes them tick. I really love doing that. We participate in creating species status reviews for the groups. So these ones were done in 2016, 2017. They'll be redone 10 years later, and we'll be able to track what's happening with the status of these species. And as Mark said, also co-chair of the Mayfly and Stonefly Caddisfly specialist group for the IUCN, which is going to be looking at this on a red listing on a global scale. Our first look will be at caddisflies in Europe, and then we've got some African mayflies that we're looking at as well. These things turn up new discoveries. We've in the last couple of years we've had 2 new mayflies to the UK, described to the UK, Betis atlanticus, which was revealed by molecular techniques and the presence of a haplotype representing the species in the UK. And when we looked at the morphological features, we managed to find it. And then Syphilinurus aestivalis, which was a chance discovery, really. Andrew Farr and I had been confused by a species down in the south of England, specimens down in the south of England. But a Dutch ecologist was over having a walking holiday in Scotland and collected some specimens and identified them as Syphilinurus aestivalis, and that, yes, that's what was confusing us in the south of England. And it's interesting because McCann wrote a paper when he was at the FBA on the taxonomy of British Syphilinuridae, and it's been nice to be able to add to that information that McCann had produced, and to show all 4 species together. We've still got, what's interesting is we've still got another species, we've got specimens that don't match any of these species, so there may be a 5th Syphilinurus species in the UK. We'll have to wait and see. And the molecular angle, been working with the Natural History Museum on their Fresh Base project, which is trying to get at least 1 voucher of every UK freshwater species to allow DNA sequencing to be undertaken. It's fairly slow progress. You see there for the insects, there's 344 vouchers so far, but there's probably a bit more now. But there's basically everybody can contribute to this. Just get in touch with Ben Price at the museum, and he will set you straight with what he needs. And just to finish off, all through this, the FBA has been kind of a thread through all my interest in freshwater, from the first time when I picked up McCann's book in the library and discovered all this information about invertebrates, through the Gilson Award and doing work on Annelitis, and then learning from some of the greats of the FBA, and looking at their research and just understanding and trying to add to that understanding on the back of their work. And the keys have been absolutely fundamental to my understanding of freshwater invertebrates, and they're such a great resource. Not just the key themselves, but the notes that come with them. And I'm really pleased, really honoured to be doing the update to the Stonefly key, which is coming soon. It should be out next year. Hugh Feely and I have written the key, and Jason Doe has done all the photographs for it. It's going to be photographic. It's going to have species accounts for all the species, and I think that's probably enough of a sales pitch on that. But buy it. Thank you for listening. Apologies, that's just about in time, but it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and I'm really happy to take any questions.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Craig. Definitely one of our most interesting talks so far. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions?
I'm just wondering if the rarity of species like triops is simply because of under-recording. People aren't out looking for it because they're not expecting to see it. And could it actually be more common than is actually currently thought?
It's possible. It's certainly the work that Glasgow University did, the University of Glasgow did, when they looked at, they took sediment samples from ponds on the Merse, on the Solway Merse, and discovered more ponds with it present in it, just by rehydrating. Well, actually, yeah, there was DNA analysis as well at the University of Derby, I think it was. So yeah, it possibly. I mean, it's got a cryptic lifestyle in that it stays in. It can stay, in the egg stage for quite a long time, before hatching out when conditions are correct. So it could turn up. It really needs, people just to keep an eye out and not just walk past these muddy puddles. Have a look and see what's in them.
And would eDNA stuff possibly find extra?
It's so eDNA. I suppose you need to make sure that eDNA is not just complicating things. I mean, you can take a sediment sample and just put it under the microscope and look for the eggs, which is probably a lot quicker and cheaper than doing anything with eDNA for this species. I don't. I mean, I wouldn't use eDNA for this species. I would just take some samples and have a look.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Chris, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks very much, and thanks, Craig, for an absolutely fabulous talk. It was just a follow-up on that, and dredging, we're almost talking 50 years ago. I seem to remember someone reporting triops from temporary pools on the Marlborough Downs in Wiltshire, which would be a clay with flint capping on chalk, which doesn't seem correct, but it's closer to the New Forest than the Solway is, I guess. Is that completely impossible? I remember it being, trumpeted as being a rediscovery of something fantastic. I can't find any record. I've just been digging around in the Wiltshire archaeological stuff.
I think that's fairy shrimp.
Yeah, it may well have been.
Because Wiltshire, there's populations right across the chalk there on Salisbury Downs and Salisbury Plains, sorry, and so on. I think it'll be fairy shrimp.
Yeah, that sounds more like it too. Certainly. Thanks. Anyhow, brilliant talk.
Okay, I'm just looking through the chat here. Everyone's just saying excellent talk, really, Craig. Alan's asking if you could post the information of the Lepidoptera book in the chat box. We can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has any questions.
Hi, my name's Kamal. Question, Craig. What are the vectors that enable new ponds or ponds that aren't colonized with certain species? What are the vectors that enable new ponds to be colonized by invertebrates?
So in a local context, it's probably livestock. Picking up mud and the like. Birds will transport eggs and invertebrates on their plumage. People as well. I mean, the action. One of the actions for the tadpole shrimp is to make sure that the farmer keeps driving through the ponds. So that the mud is spread across the site, and when he goes through the next puddle, he gets some mud going in there with some triops eggs in it. Some of the best sites are where there's disturbance, basically.
Okay. Do you think groundwater will play a role in that, possibly?
Possibly. For some, I mean, some of the stuff with the Hypereus, we've gone a meter down and sucked up small Batis nymphs and stonefly nymphs and things like that. So there's certainly, if they're down there, it depends how much of a lateral spread they are. Yeah.
If you get runoff, say from a site into a stream, I mean, that could quite easily carry eggs and
yeah, and the opposite way, you get flooding, and you get you get flooding from the river going into shallow areas and ponds and things, and yeah.
Thank you, and thanks for your talk. Fascinating. You had a rich life.
Thanks.
Anybody else got any questions?
Can I ask, what have you actually seen under the snow? Do you think it's actually there's 4-degree water flowing happily with little critters happily playing in it, or not?
There are streams up there that stop flowing, and there's streams that keep flowing.
So you have dug beneath the snow sufficiently to see that some do continue flowing.
No, you go to where it's opening out, and you can see.
Okay.
So we did plan to do that in whatever year the first lockdown was in, and we didn't. Two things: we got lockdown, and there wasn't any snow. So yeah, we do plan to do that. The species is, Amyletus in that stream that we're fairly sure does stop flowing, and perhaps is pooling underneath there. Amyletus is growing consistently through that period, and the temperature just doesn't drop below zero.
I suppose yes, I'm thinking about it as if the ecosystem stops at the stream bed. It's probably the hyporheic zone's probably still flowing.
Well, it's pretty thin, the hyporheic zone there, because it's on sort of like rock.
Can I ask a second question?
Yeah.
Of course you can.
What's your favourite? Which species is your favourite?
Stonefly is probably Brachyptera, because I've it's just it's unique, it's
a nice choice.
Yeah, and mayflies, I just because it's gorgeous, is Potamanthus luteus in the UK. It's just a gorgeous adult fly.
Okay, I thought you were going to go for Cyclonurus, but no, controversial. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, Craig. I think that wraps it up. We're bang on time. Thank you. Look out for news of our next webinar, which will be on social media, or if you're a member, you'll receive an email. And we'll see you at the next one. Okay, thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Mark.